Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about what can board members learn from analyst reports on their company. And, I'm often asked because I've done over 530 plus shows, if I ever have a problem with running out of topics. Well, today is a great example. In all those past 530 plus shows, I have never done any on analyst reports. So I'm happy to welcome today a very respected analyst, and that is Frank Morgan, who's the Managing Director of Healthcare Services Equity Research at RBC Capital Markets. And again, as I said, a very respected analyst. Welcome, Frank.
Thanks for having me.
So, in this board world, directors have always been advised to do some homework outside of the boardroom, check up on their company, find out, do some research on your own. And one of the suggestions that I've always heard is to read analyst reports about your company. So my question is simple. From your perspective, what can board members learn from analysts and analyst reports that would make them more effective, or even what they should definitely know about their company?
Sure. Well, and if you don't already get those analyst notes, by all means, you should start doing it. And I'm sure sometimes the management of the company will arrange to get that set up for you, but you can literally reach out to the analyst directly and say, hey, would you mind putting me on your courtesy email list? And I would recommend you do it for competitors as well. So not just the company that you serve on the board on, but for other companies as well. And I think, I would look at that research really through two different lenses, as a board member. I would say, one, just think of it as a value, looking at it for focusing on the valuation of the company. But then I think probably what matters more to you, because the valuation is going to be more than likely what it's going to be, is really looking at it from an operational perspective, from the inside nuts and bolts, like what is that analyst seeing in your results? I would read both the positive reports, and I'd certainly read the negative reports from the analyst community. And I do think it's healthy, to have and get that perspective of an analyst who may have more of a critical eye about the company. So once again, especially if it's just not a valuation call, I wouldn't get too worried if an analyst were to say, I just think the stock is fully valued. What I would really pay attention to and really focus on is just, here are two or three specific issues that I think to the company or that are affecting that industry. By all means, I would really want to focus there. So I think it's a good way to make you certainly a more educated and more informed board member.
Well, Frank, I wanted to make sure that I let our audience know that when I asked you to come, I promised you that I wouldn't ask you anything about the companies that you oversee or, just talk about analysts in general. But when you hear about a bad analyst report, is it something that there are times where there's something to learn from that, though? Like you said, read the bad ones as well as the good ones, because sometimes an analyst can point out something that maybe the board hasn't been brought up to the board, or the board could think about.
Right. I would say, when an analyst writes a negative report and he's got something he or she has something very specific, they are not wrong 100% of the time. Sometimes they're actually right. I mean, they get it right, and they may have a nugget that turns into something that's, I can think of in my career. I won't go into any details, but yeah, there have been times where analysts have pointed out very important things that everyone was missing, and probably most of the management team was missing, and probably some of the board members were missing. So, I think you always take that. You always have to take that. You don't discount it. Go ahead and read it, and try to ask your fellow board members, and that management team about these issues, and see how they respond, and then do your own work as well.
So, a logical question for a board member who is listening to this might be, how much does boards themselves factor into an analyst report? So, and has it changed over the years as boards have become certainly the focus of attention, from the outside more and more? So, can you just sort of give us a general feel of how analysts feel about incorporating specifics about boards of directors?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably more rare to see a lot of detail about the board in the actual report. But in terms of the work product that goes into that report, we all absolutely pay attention to the boards, the backgrounds. I mean, we always flip to see who it is, where they come through from, what industries they come from, and really what they can bring to the table. And I think, yeah, probably over the years, I'd say kind of what we think about has evolved. Certainly, is reporting standards have tightened up and SEC requirements have increased. But I would say it was in the old days, it was probably more just, does this person bring a good relationship to the board? Is there some tie there? Then it sort of has evolved more into what are some of the independent skills they can bring to that board, and how can they function in certain roles on those on some of the committees. We pay a lot of attention to who's on what committee, who's on the audit committee, what's their background. So we certainly pay a lot of attention there. And I would say probably the most recent trend that we're seeing is the whole ESG movement. And certainly that when I go marketing in Europe for the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about ESG. So the UK and the continent of Europe, they definitely were ahead of us there, but it is absolutely starting to become a more important issue here in the United States. And I think what you're starting to see is you're going to see probably a bigger effect on money flow into companies that have these more, that this is going to become an important part of the investment thesis, is who has a thoughtful ESG strategy. And I think you will see money flow moving that way, which could have effect on valuations of your companies. So, and I would say at RBC, we actually have created a distinct, dedicated group that produces a product called RBC ESG Stratify. So, where we look at the ESG policies of all these companies, governance, environmental, sustainability, the whole shift. So, I do think that's become a much bigger part of it, and I do think that this was sort of an investor focus over the last couple of years. I think it's going to become more of a corporate focus going forward, that a lot of corporates are starting to get the message about ESG. And I do think the other thing I would say you probably expect to see is, PMs are targeting higher allocations to companies that do have these, what they think are thoughtful ESG strategies. And over time, that will become more standardized. But I'd say that the ESG is probably the latest, greatest thing that we see when we think about, governance and boards.
Well, what's interesting about that, and certainly we've talked about this on previous shows, the research, even up till fairly recently, has shown that there's a little bit of a gap between how the investors feel about the importance of ESG and how board members are embracing it. Okay. Yeah. So the simple fact that institutional investors have been pushing so hard, and now to hear somebody like RBC saying, okay, we're going to create a special unit to specifically look at ESG, that is equally significant, okay, in the sense that directors better get aboard this train or they're going to find themselves sort of left at the station. But
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Well, Frank, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to join us. Again, this is the first time we've had a chance to sort of delve into this window into looking about analyst reports that we're certainly all well aware of. So I wanted to thank you for taking the time to join us.
Well, thanks for inviting me in. Hopefully we can do it again.
So that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.